Hello, everyone. I cannot believe it's September. I can't believe how long this short week has been, but I'm Lisa Graves, and welcome to the 5, 8.5, your midweek break, our midweek break. I'm here with Nadine Smith, and you know the routine, 5 stories, 8 minutes each, and a chance to refuel. We slow things down to sip, reflect, and remember, you are not alone. We're not alone. This is important because some weeks you need that reminder more than others. How are you doing, Nadine?
I'm doing great. You say we are not alone, and I immediately think of Close Encounters of was it the fourth kind or the third kind?
Third kind. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing surprisingly well, and I'm eager to talk about this wild week that we've had. So it's been a real emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
With people watching out for the pizza orders in Washington, D.C. and trying to be amateur medical sleuths to girding ourselves for today's press conference, which was really quite emotionally devastating.
Yeah.
And some bright lights, which, of course, we are the 5, 8.5, not only because we are the spinoff of the 5, 8, and not simply because we occur in the middle of the week, but the half also represents the glass half full. So we'll be bringing you, in addition to everything else, a little bit of sunshine in a glass.
Yep.
Actually, that's the part where we drink heavily and tell you some good things that are happening.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that has been happening, although not in the real world, but in my personal world, is that I have been fully exploring all manner of sort of British humor shows, quiz shows, game shows, because they are almost entirely Trump free. And so my latest discovery of joy is a show called Would I Lie to You? And you guess whether someone is lying or telling the truth.
Wait, how is that Trump free?
I know, but it really it really is mostly Trump free. I would say that at least so far, like 98% of the episodes do not involve Trump. But in a weird way, I feel like we're experiencing Would I Lie to You? Like, is this a lie or is this true? And it's like on the show, they basically vote. Was that a lie? This elaborate story, or was it true? But I feel like we're living in this really horrible, like the worst unscripted reality show ever.
The worst game show ever.
Yeah, with Trump as the sort of orchestrator of it, and this cast of characters, people he's cast to play these roles as cabinet members who are mostly, to a person unsuited to the position of responsibility that they have been assigned. Although they've been assigned not based on merit, but based on loyalty and, do they look good to Trump? Do they look like that role? But I feel like on the premise of that Would I Lie to You show, like it's just every day, another lie, another series of lies. But this time around, without the Washington Post actually counting the lies, because the big billionaire is, has been kissing up to Trump along with other big billionaires. But anyway, so I for what it's worth, if you need a good laugh, I highly recommend checking out Would I Lie to You. Downside, speaking of Bezos, is it's on Amazon. So,
well,
yeah.
What is it? There's no guilt-free consumption under capitalism. So,
yeah, that's true.
All right.
That's true. Well, we're going to transition into the first topic, which is a tough topic. It was a really important day today for the voices of the survivors of the sex trafficking schemes of Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein on the Hill. That there was a preposition in the wrong place there, but the trafficking schemes, around the world. But the press conference today was on the Hill in Washington, D.C., outside the Capitol, and it featured an array of brave women telling their stories of how they were treated, mistreated, abused, violated by Maxwell and Epstein, talking about how they were threatened. Their lives were threatened, their family, some of them talking about how their families were threatened, their future was threatened by Maxwell and Epstein. and promising to write a list of the sort of the client list that Pam Bondi, who was formerly paid as a defense attorney for Trump and is now paid by us to defend Trump, along with her deputy attorney general, another man who, Todd Blanche, who was also previously paid by Trump as criminal defense attorney and now paid by us, basically as his defense attorney at the Justice Department, and just the monstrous machinations of those two in an effort to protect Trump and use the power of the Justice Department to protect Trump by giving sort of it wasn't scripted, but the implication of the scripting was there all along for the recording of Maxwell in that interview, really that staged piece of propaganda, that Potemkin village of an interview, basically, with Maxwell about claiming that Trump was just a gentleman and never did anything wrong. Even though Trump was Epstein's best friend for 15 years, including at least 5 or more of the years in which the indictments cover of Maxwell and Epstein. And actually, the relationship appeared to extend beyond that period, because the last time Epstein's name appears on the Mar-a-Lago guest lists of customers, clients, etc., is in 2007, which was when Epstein began to serve his sentence, his slap on the wrist sentence for these crimes. And so what happened today was powerful. I found it so emotional, so important to have these women's voices be heard when they've been ignored and dismissed and disregarded, quite frankly, by this pedophile protecting administration. So yeah, that was my initial reaction, for what it's worth. What are your thoughts, Nadine?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we have to talk about the incredible bravery of these women, threatened by the most powerful people in the world, to remain silent. People who have shown a capacity to inflict all manner of cruelty, traumatized as they were by what they saw happen. And Bondi isn't just fumbling the release of the list. When, in Florida, she has been part of that machinery that has protected and enabled Epstein. And so she's just continuing a role that she learned to play long before she took the current position. But I think what they did today that was so important was to move this from this kind of theoretic conversation about people whose names and faces, for the most part, we do not know and we've never seen. And when Marina Lacerda spoke publicly for the first time, talking about being a 14-year-old, and talking about how the failure to release these documents isn't simply that they are hiding this list of powerful people, but she said they have documents with my name on them that were confiscated from Jeffrey Epstein's house and could help me put the pieces of my own life back together.
Yeah. So
the power of these women to step forward, the solidarity of them is absolutely inspiring. And then what we've seen, I was listening to Don Lemon talk about after speaking or listening to victims. Nancy Mace had left the meeting abruptly, very distraught, and he saw her kind of tucked in a corner, having what he described as a panic attack. And he approached her and kind of asked if she was okay. And of course, Nancy Mace has said horrible things. She's enabled this administration. I do not want to put a golden patina around her, but she responded to him and said that it overwhelmed her as somebody just 2 years out of experiencing a sexual assault. And she basically begged him for privacy, asked him if he would respect her privacy, and he did not air the footage. She has, to my understanding, added her name to Thomas Massey's now this bipartisan demand that the files be made public, right? And I think they only need somewhere, someone can fact check me, somewhere between 4 and 6, maybe 6 Republicans to join.
Yep, 6.
And I think they have added, I think right now it is Massey Mace. She added her name, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and a ton of pressure is being applied to House members. So much pressure that Trump came out and said, listen, anybody who adds their name to this, this is a Democratic hoax that never ends. He said, this is just grandstanding. And, there's a process unfolding right now through the House Oversight Committee. And Massey, to his credit, has not backed down. He's saying the fact that you are pressuring Republicans not to sign on is the clearest indicator that what the Oversight Committee is actually pumping out is heavily redacted, carefully curated, and does not disclose who this network of pedophiles. Now, he tries to sort of split the difference by saying, I'm not saying that Trump is one of them, but he is protecting really powerful people. And if that's what he needs to say to make it a little bit easier for other Republicans to sign on, by all means. But there are 2 things that I hope will come from this. One, I hope the pressure on Republicans and the shame that I hope is burning in the slab of congealed fat that is, Dan Bongino's soul. I hope that there are just enough people for whom this is the breaking point, and that the pressure on Republicans to sign on will increase. I think the Senate, I think they could do a sense of the Senate and push for the same kind of thing, like something that preemptively says you cannot pardon Maxwell under any circumstances.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that it's not binding. These are the kinds of things that have to happen right now. And number 2, and this I mean with complete sincerity, I hope what this sparks is a sexual abuse survivors march on Washington, whether it's on Washington and in all 50 states. I think this is an issue where we will find a whole lot more Nancy Maces, a whole lot more women who, if you asked them the day before it was called whether they would ever do that, this is a question. It doesn't matter. I was in a class one time, which was made up mostly of Republicans. It was a leadership class. And so a woman said, pretty much every woman you know has either experienced sexual violence or narrowly escaped it. And most of the men were like, I don't know about that. That sounds, before this, it was a class where we met multiple times. Before the class was over, every man who talked to his wife, daughter, mother, aunt, came back and said every single one of them had a story. And so I think there is something that can be awakened in this moment that would be incredibly powerful. And I know I'm going to push for this Survivors March on Washington.
Yeah, I support that completely, Nadine. When the Kavanaugh nomination was pending for the Supreme Court, and there was all this discussion, these claims of, false testimony, false claims by women. I just had this really clear moment thinking, actually, the narrative that has been lost, has never been stated adequately, is we don't actually have a crisis of false cries of rape. What we have is an absolute crisis of false denials by men who've raped. And that it's like, that's the actual reality, is that most of the time that a man is accused of rape, he denies it, even when it's true. And I would say it's largely true, with few exceptions. It's like inverted. The dialogue, the rhetoric is inverted. And like you said, almost every woman I know has, as you said, either survived a sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, or narrowly escaped an attempted sexual assault in the United States. It is an epidemic, and it's one that continues. There was obviously an effort to try to address some of these things through the Biden administration's efforts to make sure that women who came forward in universities under university guidelines had the chance to testify. I think the Obama administration had begun this effort, but then Trump, with Betsy DeVos, the first time around, reversed that to give more protections to the men who were accused of perpetrating assaults. And that's just in the campus scenario. This situation, in terms of the trafficking of women, the systematic trafficking of girls and women by Epstein and Maxwell over the course of several years, not just 1 year, not just 5 years, not just the years of the indictment. That was just the period, that was chosen to do this initial investigation that turned up so many young girls who she'd been a predator, predating basically, and grooming and sexually molesting herself along with Epstein, and setting them up in that way. I mean, these are horrifying, damaging actions, and I join you in being hopeful that today's effort, this taking a stand publicly by so many people who've survived this particular sex trafficking ring, will help ignite, a further show of unity by women who have been assaulted or have been the subject of attempted assaults. And I have to say that the notion that it couldn't be held. This is not a hearing that the House was willing to hold. This is not a hearing that the House was willing to have in its hearing rooms, because Mike Johnson is so cowardly. The Speaker of the House is so cowardly that he basically sent people home early for August recess to try to avoid this issue coming to a head in terms of a vote on that discharge petition. And I spoke with Ian Masters about this earlier today, the culpability of the Speaker of the House. And I don't think that we should forget that, there have been a number of sexual predators in the House of Representatives, actually, including Dennis Hastert, who was
Absolutely.
So,
and Jim Jordan, who looked the other way as wrestlers were being molested, and turned to him, and he turned his back on them. I think one of the things that is worth talking about is that we have normalized sexual violence in the way that we are feeling that sense that gun violence has been normalized. Like, we hear about it. We barely pause now. It doesn't shock the conscience. It doesn't interrupt the flow of the day. It's like, oh, that's really terrible. That's terrible. Okay, next, right? And there was a time it brought us to a complete halt, a shocking complete halt.
Yeah.
We're deep soul searching, and now it's sort of like, well, and before that, we have normalized sexual violence. We have Republicans. Who was the guy from Alabama who?
Yes. I can't believe I forgot his name, but the one who was running for the Senate, who was a predator at the malls, had to be warned. He was a district attorney in his late 20s, early 30s, who was pursuing teenagers at the mall in Alabama, so much so that he had to be warned away, according to the security guy at that mall, that this lawyer was pursuing minors. Just gross. And he was backed by a bunch of Republicans. Some distanced themselves from him, but some did not. And similarly, back in I think it might have been 2012, during the election that was called the War on Women election, we had a prominent right-wing women's group called the Independent Women's Forum, and its right-wing arm, the Independent Women's Voice. That may make you think that they're actually independent, but they trade on that name in order to advance a pretty right-wing agenda, including running robocalls to defend the Senate candidates, the Republican Senate candidates, including the one who said, you can't get pregnant from rape, and the other one who said, if you get pregnant from rape, that's just God's will. Like, good, congratulations. Todd Aiken and his fellow Murdoch, his fellow Republican candidate, who lost that year. So we have had reactions that have been victorious against these rapey men or rape apologists before. We have had some losses when Trump stood by his man and put Kavanaugh on the court, despite Christine Blasey Ford's compelling testimony. We have Hegseth at the helm of the Defense Department, despite the reporting about
Right.
the assertion that he roofied a woman, a married woman, and other misdeeds on his part that he's denied. But I think there was some really strong statements about, and we now have a president who has basically blessed the giving Ghislaine Maxwell a lighter sentence for now, and who knows what a possible pardon later. I think you're totally right. There should be on the record votes about her sentence basically being effectively commuted, in essence, to this country club prison camp, and possibly ultimately released or pardoned by Trump at some point, which is just grotesque. But what's already happened is grotesque. So I'm hoping that more Republicans join those petitions. I hope that they vote to have the material involving what the survivors want the public to know to be shared. And I hope that every single member of Congress that fails to support transparency and accountability for anyone who defends and aids Maxwell and Epstein in any way, or defends this special treatment for them, I hope that every single one of them loses their job, loses their role as a public official at some point.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Ooh. Well, and it's everywhere. I was thinking about pop culture, that song Fancy. Here's your one chance, Fancy, don't let me down. I mean, it was a #1 song on the country charts. I think it reached #5 on the pop charts, and it's about a woman, essentially pimping out her daughter to escape poverty.
Yeah.
They say the most dangerous time in a abusive woman's life is the moment she decides to leave. Yeah. And I think in that same vein, there are those who are fighting back, who are survivors, who find their voice and they speak out. And there are those who have been shown time and time again that their voice doesn't matter. And they better learn to navigate a system in which they do not have a right to their own bodies, and they play the Reba McEntire role, and they can be the most cruel enforcers of that system. So yeah, we've got to have a reckoning with this. You brought up Kavanaugh, and I just want to say this: everyone believed her.
Yep.
But everyone believed her.
Yep.
And he cried. And a bunch of people who went, hey, if you go back far enough, I probably all of these men who said, do I have a few things that if held up to scrutiny wouldn't pass muster? They believed her, but they identified with him.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really, I had arguments with some of my male friends, not all of them, but some of my male friends who had that sort of perspective. And there's definitely more I could say about that. One of my first jobs that I looked for when I was in college was to work with the victim witness coordinator in Wisconsin in the DA's office, because finally Wisconsin had mandatory arrest for domestic violence. That mandatory arrest, I don't think, extended to all claims of sexual violence, but in a domestic relationship, a family relationship, there was finally in the late 80s a requirement that the police actually arrest the men who beat their wives. And that was not the case for decades before. And even in that period, there were discussions about whether marital rape could even exist, whether that could count as a crime. That's how, we've come a long way really in the last 40 years, but it's shocking how regressive things were. And then of course, fast forward to the Dobbs decision and the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and the despicable decision, not just the actual decision of Sam Alito, but Sam Alito's decision to cite a man who basically, justified marital rape, centuries ago as an authority that we should listen to on the rights of women in America in the 21st century. So we are still fighting some of these really regressive, repressive forces. And there's so much great commentary, by the way, in the comments note. Roy Moore, Thanks for flagging that. And then just want to say, like, Susan Collins, her culpability for Kavanaugh, I mean, that is something that I think just cannot be forgiven ever, ever. Yeah.
Well, I know we didn't put the stopwatch on.
I know. I had it, and then it rang, and I didn't call it. Okay, but I will put it on for the next topic.
But it was worth lingering on that topic. That was an important one for us to dive a little bit deeper into.
Yeah. So I have a new column today over at Courier on Substack, and it's about the executive order or piece of paper styled as an executive order signed by Trump just 2 days ago, asserting some sort of power to deploy nationwide troops to purportedly enforce the laws in cities. This extension of what's been happening in my former hometown, or my adopted hometown, the Washington, D.C., to extend that to cities nationwide. And it's a shocking order. It's a profoundly dangerous order. I think it's an unconstitutional order. It's a counter-constitutional order. And it's predicated on lies. It's predicated on this notion that there's some sort of crime wave happening, and the president gets to just send in troops wherever he wants to, quote, restore public order, whatever that means, however they define it. And I contrast that with the findings of the January 6th committee about the order that was issued by Trump's Department of Defense just 2 days before, the day before and 2 days before January 6th, in which Trump asked Acting Secretary Chris Miller to make sure that the DC National Guard were disarmed for January 6th. They were not allowed to have batons or shields, let alone, heavy guns on that day. And that was the order that went out. And so and the order also said that no one could basically change those orders without the specific personal dictate of the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense, in essence. So on January 6th, as our Capitol was being assaulted, as police were being attacked, as grievous crimes were being committed, the Secretary of Defense sat and waited in response to calls from governors, from members of Congress to aid the Capitol Police. Meanwhile, the DC National Guard was literally disarmed. Finally, a few hours in, Miller issued an order allowing them to participate, but then they had to assemble at the DC Armory to get the weapons that they were denied as part of Trump's disarming of them, and then get their rules of engagement, and then report to the Capitol. And by then, Trump had already issued the statement calling them patriots and urging them to go home. That part of the story, in the January 6th committee hearings was powerful then, and it stands in stark contrast to the rules of engagement we're seeing issued now. Now, purportedly, the rules in DC are, they can't use deadly violence unless they're facing deadly violence. So there's like some baseline non-engagement, using those weapons of war that they have in their arms. But there's also the specter, the menace of having troops in our streets, troops and heavy equipment assembled at our public spaces, the threat of it. And then there's the threat of whatever Trump may consider to be public order at any given time. And so it really is devastating. And the last thing I'll say about that is, not only was that order, that disarming of the National Guard, now the January 6th committee says, well, maybe it was partly because they didn't want to have an incident, where there would be, violence break out like Kent State. Like that's sort of the positive, sunny rationale, I suppose, of not having the Guard armed. But at the same time, we know from the testimony before the January 6th committee that Trump was telling the Secret Service not to disarm his people, to not use the magnetrons to keep them from passing into that inner circle, to hear his call to action while they were armed. And so we have these two contrasting scenarios. His fans, his lawless, violent, menacing, fanboys were allowed to be armed, but the DC National Guard was disarmed and not allowed to engage in defense and protection of our Capitol until late that day. And now here we are 4 years later with Trump claiming that he's trying to create a special quick reaction force the very type of quick reaction force he affirmatively denied access to on January 6th.
The consequences of not punishing people for the coup, the consequences of not punishing Trump for the coup continue to unfold. History has taught us over and over again in this country that if you do not take strong action, you turn an attempt into a training exercise. And that's where we find ourselves. And it's fascinating because all of these Second Amendment, amosexuals who cannot stop talking about their right to bear arms and rise up against an authoritarian, and they cannot, keep Posse Comitatus out of their mouths and don't tread on me. And they have absolutely, rolled over and shown their belly, and it's completely yellow because they are willing to allow Trump to do what he pleases. And we know that the reason for this deployment is to provoke, to bring, matches to gasoline. He's waiting for the conflict that allows them to escalate, spill blood, whether it's in LA, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Philadelphia, and any other big Democratic-run city. And it may be redundant to say big Democratic-run city. I was trying to think of a big Republican-mayored city.
I'm going to call Eric Adams a quasi-Republican because of the corruption and the deal that he was willing to cut with the Trump administration. But in fact, he is a registered Democrat.
Yeah, he was a registered Democrat. He's a registered Democrat, and ran under that umbrella because, where are the Republican mayors? We know that the crime that is unfolding is happening disproportionately in red states and red cities. But yeah, so this is political theater hoping to ignite the thing that will allow them to become even more brutal. But I just want to say people are pushing back. If you don't follow the Jolly Green Ginger on social media, I encourage you to. He's part of a veterans encampment in D.C. at Union Station. They've been playing General Milley's call to troops that you do not serve a king, you do not serve a politician, you serve a constitution, and it has been a beautiful thing to see. And you can see them kind of making inroads with these people who've been yanked out of their real lives to do something outside of the scope of their training and their mission. And there is precedent for, people like Maryland's governor saying, I'm prepared to fight if you try to take control of our guard. And so it has been a dangerous escalation, but it has also been an inspiring escalation of resistance. And increasingly we see places where entire neighborhoods are pushing back, literally chasing these folks away. And people have found increasingly clever ways, hilarious ways to show them the contempt that they deserve and to rob them of their ability to perform this theater with their masked up camo, all of the things they're doing to be that intimidating force. So more of that.
And jury nullification too. The effort to indict the guy who threw the sandwich, the former Justice Department employee who threw that sandwich, that the fact that grand jury said no in a string of losses for Jeanine Pirro, another person who should never have been put in a position of power, who's now the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and basically is, using apparently a lot of her time to just go on TV and make a variety of claims like her previous job. Basically, she's doing her previous job in her current job, but at taxpayer expense, and has not been successful at convincing the citizens of the District of Columbia that there should be federal charges against someone who expressed his opposition by throwing a sandwich, which I know all the jokes have been told about how a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich, but in this instance would not indict a ham sandwich thrower. So, and that, jury nullification is an important, as we talked about last time, has been misused, but can be an important tool for the people to speak out, to stand up against injustice.
And then two more shout outs as we move to the next topic. One is, it's jolly good ginger, not Jolly Green Ginger, but I bet
That's
he's a
good, 'cause I wrote
green.
down Jolly
I
Green
think he's,
Ginger.
I think he's a pro-environmentalist too. So Jolly Good Ginger, he's on all
Nice.
platforms, but the videos are really impressive, and they get right up in the faces of these guys, and they really challenge them. And the other is a former guest of ours, Lisa Bovey, who has a Substack
Yes.
called Square Cop and Around World, and she's written about that today, and I'll just drop the link in for folks who want to read about that. But she and Jolly Good Ginger and other veterans are standing up and pushing back and calling on other veterans. So it's really been, it's scary. It is intended to be, but I love the contempt, the disrespect, and as I said, they're following them around, playing the Imperial March, and but also having real conversations, veteran to veteran.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
I laughed at the name in part because as a honorary Minnesotan, I've been to the Jolly Green Giant statue. I think it's in Le Sueur, Minnesota. It's down in the southwestern part of the state, and it is really a very tall Jolly Green Giant. It is in fact giant, but it is not involved in dialogue over our Constitution. So hats off.
There you go. That's right.
The dialogue happening there with the Jolly Good Ginger in Washington, D.C. But yeah, now to change locations to Florida, I don't know how I can be shocked at this point, but in fact, I was completely shocked to read today that DeSantis has issued an order that kids do not need to be vaccinated to go to schools in Florida. And I just I don't want to say I can't imagine a more reckless thing because we're talking about an array of reckless things, but
sure.
The idea that kids are not going to get vaccinated mandatorily for measles or mumps, rubella, these childhood diseases that have, in previous decades before these really effective vaccines were created and approved and widely deployed, people became disabled as a result of these diseases. They became blind. They lost their sight for their entire life. They had all manner of other adverse consequences from these deadly and damaging diseases. And now we have, between DeSantis and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I just think I need some other moniker for him, but that dude, it's like unleashing pestilence on America, unleashing the plague on America by changing policies that have protected public health for decades based on completely ridiculous claims, like unscientific claims of supposed science, when these vaccines have been proven effective. And we have these other outbreaks happening because of the moronic, although, I guess people feel like they're protecting their kids to do it, but just the selfish disregard for actually widely accepted science that has been proven to be valid and accurate, not just thousands of times, millions upon millions of people who got those vaccines, the measles vaccines and more, who did not get measles, did not suffer those adverse consequences, have and are leading fully productive lives. Tens of millions of Americans, I'm sure if the tally were fully tallied, it would be well over 1 billion Americans have benefited themselves directly from these vaccines. And yet you have these horrible people in positions of power like DeSantis and like Kennedy, who are basically destroying sound public policies that protect our kids, protect our families, protect our communities from these terrible diseases, these scourges, and just arbitrary, capriciously, I think almost with malice, being willing to bring back these diseases, these scourges into our communities. So DeSantis, again, up to terrible, no good.
The terrible, no good. Well, you know what? I'm going to take a different tack because I think all of us immediately, instinctively go, this is madness, and it's going to lead to unnecessary death. But I think in some ways they've painted themselves into an ideological corner, which they are following to its absurd conclusion. It's kind of like the moment you begin to take, for example, when my son was born, figuring out vaccines was not just simply, okay, check, check, check. We did a ton of research. We wanted to know, epidemiologically, this is what is recommended because it is based on what most people can do, right? Parents aren't going to bring their kid in 7 times. So we'll stack it so that they only have to bring them in 3 times. Well, we're the parents that'll bring them in 7 times. So we're going to do the research to figure out, the best possible way. And it also, so it is possible, and we hit immediate resistance because what I did not realize was this, all of this vaccine misinformation and all this, it causes autism, all that stuff was becoming so prevalent that just by asking a question, they assumed that we were, just reading the same blogger, right? Or, and so I get, number one, that it's okay to question the sequencing, the spacing, and these kinds of things. What is also true is we live in a world where people ask the question, hey, is the scientific process actually a divorce from the financial world? Do I trust Big Pharma? Has Big Pharma, manipulated things so that I have to wonder whether or not I am getting good information? Those are 2 reasonable questions that I think rational people could raise. Unfortunately, those 2 things in this world that we're currently living get morphed into disinformation that creates a world in which people are distrustful of experts in all realms. And they are eager to embrace conspiracy theories that make them feel smart. And so when you combine legitimate concerns with the funhouse mirror distortion of the right, we end up in this place. DeSantis opened up and made available COVID vaccines, did press releases about, how important it was for people to come and get vaccinated, wore a mask, did all of these things until politically it wasn't valuable to him anymore. Until politically it was more valuable to him to denigrate those things, to turn on those things, and to appoint true believers in this nonsense into powerful positions. And so we end up with a Surgeon General, Joseph Ladapo, who has said this is an end to all state vaccine mandates, including for children attending schools, making Florida the first state to completely withdraw from practices credited with boosting, vaccination rates and controlling infectious diseases. And so, we're talking about polio, diphtheria, measles, whooping cough, mumps, tetanus, chickenpox, hepatitis, like extraordinarily communicable diseases. And it makes me think, I don't have the numbers and maybe somebody can look this up, but there was a partisan divide in the number of people who died during COVID, and more Republicans died because they did not get vaccinated. They refused to mask. They engaged in untried, untested quackery instead of solid science. And will we see that same divide here? Will we see, schools where, I guess, maybe charter schools where they can require you to vaccinate to come to that school because they don't play by the same rules? I don't know that that's true, but I guess what I'm saying is we may begin to see that same unfortunate divide, but this time impacting children first and foremost. And they have this, again, it's this drinking of the Kool-Aid. They have this belief that our genes are better, they're stronger. This is the way you cull the herd. These diseases will take out the weak and the sick, and they'll leave, us stronger on the other side. You don't need to get your kid a measles shot. In fact, if one kid gets measles, put them all in the room, make sure they all get it. All of this mentality is the absurd but inevitable conclusion of this idea that everything, not only don't listen to science, but distrust it so much you do the opposite of what it tells you. So
it really is. I really appreciate your raising that, Nadine. And there really has been a systematic assault on expertise, whether it's the institutions like journalism and newspapers reporting the truth versus just propaganda. Not to say that newspapers have never reported propaganda, but just this idea that you can't trust anybody, can't trust anything besides what AI or a Google search leads you to, and then you believe the thing that reinforces your view. This assault on rational thinking, on reasonable thinking, has been so persistent in recent years that it is really extraordinary. And when I think about big pharma, I definitely, as someone who's a lawyer, I've tracked some of the drug recalls over time, that some of the revolving door stuff that we've seen happen at the FDA with some medicines, and, people having adverse reactions that because the FDA is relying on the company to tell you, how did this test or whatever. But I think that there's a difference between bringing a new drug to market and some of these long-standing, tried and true tested vaccines, like for measles, mumps, and rubella, that these are, these have been effective for decades. And some of them, it's not like there's some massive, huge new profit motive to release it. I just think there is a difference. And I do have a bias about it, in part because I clerked on the court that handled the vaccine injury compensation cases. So when I was first starting out as a lawyer, I was on the court that handled the cases that addressed the question of potential adverse reactions of vaccines. And not to get too far into the weeds on it, but the reality is that there is a system that has been in place. I think it could use some improvement, but it is designed to say that if your child had normal development up to this point, had a vaccine, maybe one vaccine or that series, and then had an adverse reaction that, a fever the next day, a seizure the next day, that in those instances, the family would not have to prove causation of the vaccine. It would be assumed, and they would be entitled to compensation, lifelong compensation, if there were an injury. There are very, very few such injuries. But if you think about vaccines like, other substances, there's a certain percentage of the population that is allergic to strawberries or allergic to shrimp or allergic to peanuts, can't handle aspirin. And for some of these, for some of those allergic reactions, it's exceedingly rare. And what I see is people like RFK Jr. preying on those few families that have had a vaccine injury, the infinitesimally small number of a very, very safe drug that protects the overwhelming majority of the population, and using that to drive fear, irrational fear, and irrational concerns. And in fact, RFK Jr. became much richer through this vaccine exploitation. So over the last 10 years, or more, and in particular around COVID, his personal income grew dramatically by his embrace of this propaganda, this hype over vaccines, and preying on, in my view, these families and causing people to have irrational fears about those vaccines. But as you point out, I think any medicine, people need to read what the adverse consequences are. But for those vaccines, those long-standing vaccines, they've been proven so safe. And also just the irrationality of RFK claiming like he's, it's almost as if he's stuck. He certainly had one of the best educations you could buy, but it's like he's stuck in 8th grade and he's like, I didn't see many autism diagnoses when I was a kid. Therefore, vaccines are causing autism. Like, when in fact, like everything else, there's better diagnosis of everything. There's better diagnosis of cancer. There's better earlier diagnoses of heart failure. There's better early diagnoses of diabetes, of autism, that's what scientific advances mean. That's not the opposite. Therefore, our vaccines are harming our kids. It is just so, the venality of it, of how much he ended up paying himself over $500,000 a year to run the group that was spreading these claims, preying on these people, spreading this disinformation about COVID and more. Like, that's a lot of incentive, $500,000 a year, to basically continue to tell people to be afraid, be very afraid. And now he's, catapulted into this position of power at HHS, and is using that position of power destructively to harm our public health in America and across the world, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, somebody was saying, I blame the crunchy moms, and the pipeline between when you go to your local health food store to get your organic, chicken, you are as likely to be standing next to a Maha, RFK Jr. acolyte as you are to, someone who shares your values. And the pipeline from, I prefer natural things, all things being equal, or, I look for foods that aren't overly processed,
Right.
to anything I can't spell in it is evil, and only things that are found in nature. Go walk through the woods and eat all the mushrooms you see, and see if, natural and organic is always good.
Yeah.
But let us say this very
Do not, for the record, do not do that.
Don't do that. Thank you. Yes. I said I was using sarcastic font.
I know. I just put up the do not.
I like having you here to stop me from getting sued. But a CDC study found that routine childhood vaccinations prevented over 500 million illnesses, over 32 million hospitalizations, and over 1 million deaths among children, in a 10-year period. This is there's no question. And the Florida chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, she said this will put children in Florida's public schools at higher risk for getting sick, which will have a ripple effect across communities. And so, we often say Florida is the lab in which they try out these really crappy things. We will fight back here in Florida, but if it's here now, it'll be knocking on your door by morning. So everyone, Florida is a canary in the coal mine for the bad things coming, but it's also the ground where resistance is born.
Yep. All right. And on that note, we're going to pivot to our next topic, which is, hold on, I got to see the scroll. Sorry, I'm waiting for the scroll.
Department of War
in Venezuela. Okay, so, I am just shocked and horrified and outraged by this use of our military, millions and millions of dollars of military equipment and know-how to murder, like on film, these Venezuelans in a boat in the Caribbean. Like, first of all, even if they were involved in drug trafficking is not a death penalty offense. Like, you don't actually get the death penalty in the United States for drug trafficking. You get a long sentence based on the quantity of drugs you have on that boat, if that's the case, but you don't get the death penalty, and you certainly don't get summary execution. Like, okay, immediate murder. You get charged and a trial, and then, there's tracing of the evidence. Where did this come from? Who's the drug kingpin source? Like, there's a whole process. There's due process. This was not due process. I think it probably qualifies as a crime in international law. And the idea that that a president of the United States would use the military in this way, would announce this as some sort of big victory. It's like a sledgehammer against a gnat, except for the gnats are actual human beings, real people, and the force of the U.S. military to be abused in this way, all in order, it seems, just to have, like, as Rubio said, and I think Rubio's statements make him, more than complicit in this crime, this international crime that I think was just committed by the United States, that this was just a warning shot, a lesson for other drug traffickers, that they could be basically summarily executed by the U.S. military from on high. They're not terrorists. The fact that they're trying to claim that they're, quote, terrorist drug traffickers, I'm sure that there is a Venn diagram in which there are terrorists who are drug traffickers. I'm not saying it does not exist, that is a complete figment of their imagination. But, you can't just be like, oh, terrorists, therefore we get to just bomb you into oblivion instantaneously without any process. And in this instance, the real claim is that they were involved in drug trafficking. And, it's not that there is are not issues of drug trafficking in the United States. There's a lot of internal drug trafficking in the United States, but we don't have, I think, a competent administration that's actually willing to do the type of investigations that help address drug trafficking crimes. And instead, what we have is sort of this just grotesque, immoral showboating imagery, like when they had Dr. Phil go along on some ride along with ICE. It's all It's all this really terrible reality TV production that Trump is orchestrating. And I'm outraged, quite frankly, that our military would be used in this way to be involved in what I think should properly be considered an actual crime in the international criminal justice arena, for us to summarily destroy people with, and in fact, we haven't even seen the evidence that they claim was the predicate for this bombing of, this destruction of this boat. But like, it is just yet another outrageous thing this administration has done. And I cannot believe that we're there. That's also where we are on the timeline.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, these are the things, you can imagine reading a history book, or some future generation reading a history book, and that, the assassination of the Archduke, like these things that you go, where did it begin? What started this next global conflagration? And it's these kinds of imperial overreach, this hubris, this dangerous escalation of military intervention in Latin America under the guise of interdiction, when this is really about applying maximum pressure on Venezuela. This is, this is a, geopolitical chess move.
Yep.
And there's an international response. The Colombian president, criticized it as excessive, saying it's an assassination anywhere in the world if civilians were killed, and warned that historically counter-narcotics operations have focused on arrests, not the use of lethal force. And Maduro has said that his country was at maximum preparedness, and that he would declare a republic in arms if the U.S. attacked Venezuela. So, this is a dangerous escalation, and I think Americans living in that region should be particularly alarmed at the kind of anti-Americanism that creates, and the danger it creates. And this echoes decades of U.S. military intervention in Latin America. They've done it time and time again. There's a lack of transparency, disputed evidence, and threats of more strikes. And they think if they invoke drugs, or what is the gang tren Argua, that's just a blanket they can throw over any action that they take. But I believe now the U.S. has deployed 4,000 Marines and sailors to Caribbean waters, with multiple destroyers, submarines positioned near Venezuelan waters, which again is that he's calling it part of a anti-cartel operation. And we know what this means. Maduro also says they have 4.5 million militia members who are ready to ensure, quote, no empire will touch the sacred soil of Venezuela. Like, this is, we have to wake up to the danger that he places us in, and how the rest of the world begins to align when these kind of questions are called.
Yeah. I mean, it really is astonishing to see. Putin could not plan it better in terms of just the playbook of terrible, ridiculous, outrageous actions that alienate allies, worsen relationships with opponents, or states that are not, not favored states in essence by whoever is in political power. But like, the playbook of weakening the United States abroad and domestically, the actions that Trump is taking, could not be more aligned with Putin on everything, except for a little bit of, sort of maneuvering around Ukraine. But other than that, this is just Putin, I'm sure, is relishing just these maneuvers as, further evidence in their view of the corruption of America, corruption that he's helped, instill through the intervention, the efforts to influence our elections and install someone like Trump into power. But like, this is not just a one-off action. This has implications for our safety and for our safety geopolitically in terms of where we are with war and Trump wanting to be a wartime president. In fact, even saying that he's going to rename the Defense Department to the Department of War, because the dude who claimed that his bone spurs prevented him from serving in Vietnam now wants to claim that he's a wartime president and all that goes with that.
Yeah, that Greg Steube, who's a Florida Republican, is the one who filed the amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill that would formally change the name from Secretary of Defense to Secretary of War. And you just go, these guys, someone joked that Trump acts like the way a child imagines a rich person acts.
Yeah.
And these guys all act the way a child thinks a tough guy acts, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, they're not soldiers, they're war fighters. It's not the Department of Defense, it's, it's Department of War. And it's just,
it really, it's just been like, I know it's only been 8+ months, but it has been some of the longest 8+ months so far. And, here we are in only September. I know we're at the top of the hour and we had some court decisions to talk about, but I think we should save those lower courts saying no to next time, because there's a series of cases where there's some more good news coming out of the lower courts. Obviously, we still have the U.S. Supreme Court up to no good with John Roberts at the helm. And by the way, my book is coming out on September 30th, Without Precedent, about how John Roberts and his compatriots, his Confederates, have rewritten the Constitution and dismantled our rights. But I propose, Nadine, that we hold that fifth topic until next time, and we end our lovely hour with you all on the high note of a pretty interesting win of some significant magnitude dollar-wise. So what do you think? Is that all right? Should we?
I think the motion carries. It is passed unanimously. And it's a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger to make everyone will come back just to find out what we were going to talk about there. But why don't I usually launch us into the glass half full, the point in the show where we remind you that no matter how rough the weather is, there are still days when the sun shines through and lights our path forward. And in that spirit, we invite you to grab a glass of whatever your favorite beverage is. I happen to be, this is not a paid endorsement, but Kin Euphorics. This one's called Actual Sunshine. It's a mood enhancer. And what are you sipping on over there, Lisa? What are you enhancing your mood with?
Well, I have iced tea. I make sun tea all the time, so that's what I've got. But and once, by the way, I tried a Long Island iced tea, and there was no tea in it at all. It was completely shocking to me. I have never really been much of a drinker. In fact, I used to wait tables, and bring cocktails that I never actually tried. And then a few years ago, I had an old fashioned, a Wisconsin state drink for the first time. And I was like, that's like 3 or possibly 4 shots. And I think that the wealthier get away with this, because like, if you're like, from the working class, like me, and you walk into a bar and you're like, give me, I think it's from the George Thorogood song, give me a one whiskey, one shot and one beer, or something like that. I can't even get the song right. But like, they'd be like, oh man, did you have a bad day? Like, you're getting 3 shots of something. And that's like a sign. But if you're like a rich dude and you walk in, you're like, I'd like a martini or a Long Island iced tea. They're like, hey, cheers to you. Cheers and it's more alcohol. Anyway, this is actually just tea. But what we're toasting, I lost the thread. Sorry. What we're toasting is that Harvard won in court. It won an initial ruling in its legal battle against the Trump administration to restore nearly $3 billion in funding that was frozen for research by the Trump administration on the false pretense that this was about anti-Semitism, when it was really about targeting and punishing that Ivy League school and other Ivy League schools. And so, we don't know what's going to happen on appeal. We don't know what this dreadful Roberts court is going to do next, because it's out of control and damaging, the rule of law and more. But for now, for today, we have this really pretty amazing and well-reasoned ruling coming out of the federal court system U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs, let's name the people who are doing right, following the law, following the rules, has ruled in favor of Harvard, and more importantly, in favor of these research grants that they support an array of projects, including cancer research and more. So here's to justice prevailing some of the time when it does prevail. And here's to you all for, we're in it together. We're sticking together. We're not giving up. And here's to you all.
You are not alone.
You are not
Cheers. alone. Well, that does it for the 5, 8 and a half. Thank you for joining me, Nadine Smith and Lisa Graves. And we will see you a week from now. Be sure to tune in on Friday for the 5-8 with Greg Oliar and LB. Take care.